Listen closely. Do you hear it? That sound, like silk being torn underwater, like champagne glasses shattering in velvet-lined coffins. That's the sound of passion dying in the marriage bed, suffocated by mortgage payments and shared Netflix passwords. I once knew a man who kept his wedding ring in a music box that played Chopin's Funeral March. Every morning, he'd wind it up, let it play, then slip the ring on like a prisoner donning shackles. He told me the melody reminded him of something Kierkegaard wrote in his journals. Marriage brings one into fatal connection with custom and tradition. And traditions and customs are like the wind and weather, altogether incalculable. You see, there's an old Romanian folktale about a village where couples would bury a bottle of wine on their wedding day, to be dug up on their first anniversary. But here's the grotesque twist. They'd also bury a small mirror with it. When unearthed, the wine would be sweet, but the mirror would show not their faces, but the faces they wore when they first said, "I love you." The horror wasn't in how they'd aged. It was in recognizing those ancient expressions of wild, untamed desire, now foreign as hieroglyphics on their domesticated faces. Modern psychology confirms what folklore always knew. A 2024 study from the University of Zurich found that passionate love, that intoxicating cocktail of dopamine and norepinephrine, begins its inevitable decline after 18 months. The brain, that treacherous organ, literally rewires itself for companionate love, like watching a bonfire slowly transform into a radiator. Functional, yes. Life-sustaining, perhaps, but nobody writes poetry about radiators. The institution of marriage, you see, is a paradox wrapped in white lace and tied with a bow of mutual tax benefits. It promises to preserve love while systematically dismantling everything that made that love worth preserving. Like keeping a butterfly by pulling off its wings and framing it. Yes, you have the butterfly, but what you have is no longer what you fell in love with. Machiavelli understood this perverse alchemy. In his private letters, not the prince, but the desperate missives to his mistress, he wrote, "Fortune is a woman, and if you wish to keep her under, it is necessary to beat and ill-use her. But fortune and passion are sisters, and marriage is the cage that tames them both." The beating Machiavelli speaks of? It's not violence. It's worse. It's routine. It's discussing who takes out the trash while Eros weeps in the corner. Picture this. Two lovers meet in secret, hearts racing, skin electric with anticipation. Every touch is rebellion. Every kiss a small revolution. Now fast forward 5 years. Those same lovers, now legally bound, argue about the proper way to load a dishwasher. The hands that once trembled with desire now gesture wildly about credit card statements. This is the grave where passion sleeps, not buried by tragedy, but by the slow accumulation of shared mundanity. There's a Turkish proverb. When the house is finished, death enters. The house of marriage, built brick by brick with good intentions and joint checking accounts, becomes passion's mausoleum. Each honeydew list is another shovelful of dirt on the grave. But here's where it gets truly grotesque. We know this. Every couple knows this. The statistics scream it. 67% report significant decline in sexual satisfaction after 3 years, according to a 2023 Harvard study. Yet we march down that aisle like soldiers to the Somme, convinced we'll be different. We won't be the ones who let the fire die. We won't become our parents, discussing lawn care with the same mouths that once whispered obscenities in the dark. The cruelest joke? Society celebrates this death. You've matured, they say. Your love has deepened. As if depth and death weren't separated by a single letter. As if the transformation from lover to roommate were an evolution rather than a capitulation. Tell me, and be honest now, in the privacy of your own skull. When was the last time your heart raced for the person sleeping beside you? Not from anger, not from anxiety about bills, but from pure animal desire? When did you last feel that delicious terror of possibly losing them that made every moment electric with significance? If you can't remember, then you already know where passion is buried. You helped dig the grave. You threw the first handful of dirt, and every night you sleep above it, pretending the cold ground beneath you isn't getting colder. The liberation comes not from resurrection. Passion, once buried, rarely rises, but from acknowledging the funeral. Stop pretending the corpse is merely sleeping. Light a candle for what was, then decide. Will you tend this grave forever, or will you seek passion elsewhere, knowing now that every institution is its executioner? The longer you stare, the less of you it reflects. There's a peculiar phenomenon that occurs in Japanese love hotels, those neon-lit sanctuaries of anonymous desire. The mirrors on the ceilings aren't just for the obvious. Late at night, when passion has exhausted itself and two strangers lie studying their reflected selves, something uncanny happens. They report seeing not themselves, but the person they were pretending to be. The salaryman sees the wild artist he buried. The housewife glimpses the adventuress she murdered with compromise. I'll tell you a secret that Schopenhauer knew, but was too polite to articulate fully. We don't fall in love with people. We fall in love with our own potential selves, reflected in another's eyes. Every "I love you" is actually "I love who I become" in your gaze. But here's where the cosmic joke gets darker. That reflection is a funhouse mirror from the start. Consider the peacock mantis shrimp. It has 16 color receptors to our pathetic 3. It sees colors we can't even imagine, entire spectrums of reality invisible to us. Now think about this. What if every lover is a mantis shrimp, seeing in you colors you'll never possess? What if their love is based on a spectrum of you that doesn't exist? A 2025 neurological study from Stockholm revealed something deliciously disturbing. When we're in love, the medial prefrontal cortex, the brain region responsible for self-perception, literally shuts down. We become strangers to ourselves, shapeshifters molding into whatever form our lover's fantasy requires. We think we're finding ourselves in love. We're actually losing ourselves, piece by piece, reflection by reflection. There's an old Persian tale about a king who commissioned a mirror that would show truth. When his beloved queen looked into it, she saw not her beauty, but a withered crone. When the king gazed upon it, he saw not a noble ruler, but a frightened child playing dress-up. They smashed the mirror, of course, but the damage was done. They could never again look at each other without seeing what the mirror had revealed. The marriage ended not in divorce, but in something worse. Two people play-acting love, each terrified the other had seen their true reflection. This is what happens in every relationship, just slower. The mirror of your lover's eyes, once so flattering, begins to show cracks. The heroic version of you they fell for. That mysterious stranger who had it all together, who was endlessly fascinating, who never farted or had morning breath. That beautiful lie starts to pixelate like a degrading digital photo. Remember Narcissus? We got his story wrong. He didn't fall in love with himself. He fell in love with a reflection that looked nothing like him. The still water lied, as all mirrors do, showing him what he wanted to see. His tragedy wasn't vanity. It was the inability to recognize that what he loved was never real. Here's a thought experiment that'll keep you up at night. List every quality your partner claims to love about you. Your humor, your intelligence, your passion. Now ask yourself, brutally, honestly, how many of those qualities you performed rather than possessed? How many were costumes you wore to the masquerade of courtship? The modern dating app is the ultimate lying mirror. Filtered photos, curated interests, manufactured spontaneity. We've industrialized the illusion. A 2024 MIT study found that 89% of people report feeling like a different person on first dates compared to their everyday selves. But here's the kicker. 73% said they preferred that fictional version. We're not just lying to others. We're addicted to our own false reflections. Nietzsche wrote, "One is most dishonest to one's God. He is not allowed to sin." Replace God with lover, and you have the relationship paradox. The person who supposedly knows us best is the one we can never allow to truly see us. We maintain the reflection they fell for like an Instagram filter we can never turn off. But mirrors age, don't they? And the lies they tell become more obvious. That's why long-term couples develop what I call reflection fatigue. That glazed look when their partner is speaking. Because they're no longer seeing a person, but a repository of all their projected fantasies, now curdled into disappointments. The Japanese have a word, hone and tatmai, true feelings versus public facade. Every relationship exists in the space between these two. But what happens when you've worn the facade so long, you can't find your way back to hon? What happens when the mirror has lied so consistently that you no longer remember your own face? Here's what they don't tell you about being yourself in a relationship. Yourself is already a construction, a story you tell to make sense of the chaos. When someone loves that story, you become imprisoned by it. Every evolution, every change, every growth threatens the reflection they fell for. So you freeze. A taxidermied version of who you were when they first said, "You're perfect." The cruelest irony? The mirror lies most convincingly when it shows us what we think is truth. Those moments of brutal honesty in relationships? Often just another performance, another angle in the funhouse. We confess carefully selected flaws to maintain the illusion of authenticity while hiding the truly grotesque parts of our psyche. So here's my question for you, whispered like a serpent in your ear. If your lover truly saw you, not the reflection, not the performance, but the raw, unfiltered chaos of your actual being, would they run? And perhaps more terrifying, would you even recognize yourself in their accurate gaze? The liberation comes not from finding a better mirror, but from smashing them all. From accepting that every reflection is a lie, and every love is based on mutual delusion. Only then, in the shattered glass, might you glimpse something real, fractured, multiple, impossible to idealize. That's when love either dies or transforms into something stranger and more honest than romance ever allowed. You still feel the ache where your dreams used to be. At 3 a.m., when the world is honest and the darkness presses against your window like a living thing. Do you feel it? That dull throb where your ambitions used to live? Like an amputee reaching for a glass with a hand that isn't there. You reach for dreams you sacrificed on the altar of companionship. Let me tell you about phantom limb syndrome. When a limb is amputated, the brain continues to send signals to nerves that no longer exist. The patient feels pain in a hand that was cremated months ago. Now here's the delicious horror. The same thing happens with amputated dreams. You feel them aching in the middle of the night, these futures you murdered for love. There's a bar in Prague, or maybe it's Budapest, or perhaps it exists in every city where dreams go to die. Where men gather not to drink, but to confess. They speak in hushed tones about the novels they never wrote, the companies they never started, the mountains they never climbed. All sacrificed, they say, for her. For them, for the family, for stability. The bartender never judges. He lost his violin to marriage, traded Vivaldi for a steady paycheck and a woman who needed him home by 6. Kierkegaard called it the sickness unto death. Not physical death, but the slow suffocation of possibility. Every commitment is a door closing. Every yes to love a no to 1,000 other lives. But we don't mourn these deaths properly. We call them maturity and pretend the phantom pain is just nostalgia. A 2024 longitudinal study from Yale tracked ambitious individuals over 20 years. The results were grotesque in their clarity. 78% reported significant dream abandonment after entering long-term relationships. But here's the twist that would make Kafka smile. They rated their life satisfaction as moderate to high. They'd learned to love their cages, to mistake the absence of pain for the presence of joy. I knew a sculptor once. Hands that could make marble weep, vision that could see angels trapped in stone. He fell in love with a practical woman who loved him for his potential. Within 5 years, those hands that freed angels were typing spreadsheets. He kept one small chunk of marble in his garage, untouched. His wife thought it was sentimental. He knew it was a gravestone for the artist he'd been. The phantom limb throbs worst during what I call the golden hour. That time just before sunset, when the light makes everything look like a memory. That's when the disease vectors of regret multiply in your bloodstream. You see teenagers with guitars and remember when you were going to change music. You pass a bookstore and recall the novel you outlined, but never wrote. You watch travelers at the airport and feel the ghost of your wanderlust, now chained to a mortgage and school districts. Here's what they don't tell you about compromise in relationships. It's not a negotiation between two people. It's a negotiation between who you are and who you could have been. And who you could have been always has better lawyers. The ancient Greeks had a word, pothos, a longing for something absent, a desire for what is not there. But they understood it as divine madness, necessary for creation. We've pathologized it, called it commitment issues, or Peter Pan syndrome. We've made a virtue of amputation. There's a particularly cruel form of this phantom pain that occurs in what psychologists call supportive relationships. Yes, your partner encourages your dreams, says all the right things, but their very presence becomes the excuse for not pursuing them. I can't take that risk now, you say. I have responsibilities. They never asked you to stop dreaming, but their love became the chloroform that made the amputation painless. A 2025 study in behavioral economics revealed something sinister. People in relationships consistently choose safer, less fulfilling careers than their single counterparts. Not because their partners demand it, but because the brain, flooded with oxytocin and security, loses its taste for risk. Love literally changes your neurochemistry to prefer comfort over achievement. It's chemical castration of ambition. But here's where it gets truly dark. The phantom limb of lost desire doesn't just hurt you. It poisons the relationship it was sacrificed for. That low-grade resentment, that subtle bitterness when your partner succeeds where you've stagnated. That's the phantom limb trying to strangle the living flesh. You know what the most common last words are, according to palliative care nurses? Not "I love you" or "I'll miss you." It's "I wish I had," followed by whatever dream they buried. The phantom limbs all scream at once in those final moments. A symphony of unlived lives. So here's my question, posed like a scalpel to your throat. What phantom limb throbs in your chest right now? What future did you amputate for the comfort of being loved? And here's the real nightmare. If you could grow it back, would you? Or have you been an amputee so long that you've forgotten how to use the limb you lost? Some men discover too late that the relationship they sacrificed everything for was just another phantom, a ghost of connection, no more real than the dreams they killed for it. They gave up substance for shadow, traded their potential for a promise that evaporated like morning mist. The liberation isn't in leaving. It's in acknowledging the amputation, in feeling the phantom pain without shame, in understanding that every choice murders 1,000 possibilities, and that love, real love, should be worth the genocide of dreams it demands. But if it's not? If the phantom limb hurts more than the living flesh feels good? Well, then you have a decision to make. And this time, make it with your eyes open to what you're cutting away. Some men learn to live without limbs. Others realize they were never meant to. They don't drain your blood. They drain your tomorrow. Have you ever watched a spider liquefy its prey? It injects digestive enzymes that turn the insides to soup, then drinks deeply, leaving only a hollow exoskeleton. Now imagine that process. But instead of your body, it's your future being liquefied. Instead of fangs, it's needs. Instead of venom, it's tears. Welcome to the feast. There's a word in old Slavic folklore, upar, the original vampire. But these ancient bloodsuckers were amateurs compared to modern emotional vampires. Blood regenerates. Hope doesn't. When someone feeds on your potential energy, on your dreams deferred and ambitions postponed, they're drinking something far more precious than hemoglobin. I'll paint you a scene. It's 11:47 p.m. You're about to work on that project, that thing that makes your soul sing. Then comes the sigh from the bedroom. Not loud, just loud enough. You know that sigh. It's the dinner bell for emotional vampires. Are you coming to bed? They ask. And in those 5 words lies an entire ecosystem of guilt, obligation, and subtle manipulation. Your project can wait. It always does. It waits until it dies. The German philosopher Schopenhauer wrote about the will to live, but he missed its shadow, the will to make others stop living. Some people can't bear to see ambition in their partners. It reminds them of their own abandoned dreams, like showing a mirror to someone with facial scars. So they feed, not consciously, that would require self-awareness, but instinctively, the way a leech seeks warm blood. A 2024 study from the Institute of Behavioral Dynamics identified what they called achievement suppression syndrome in relationships. One partner's success triggers anxiety in the other, leading to unconscious sabotage. Late-night arguments before important meetings. Sudden crises that demand attention during creative periods. Mysterious illnesses that flare up whenever opportunity knocks. The vampire doesn't say, "Don't succeed." They say, "Not right now." And "not right now," repeated infinitely, becomes never. Let me tell you about Marie. Not her real name. Emotional vampires sue for defamation. Marie had a gift for making her husband feel guilty for breathing. When he got promoted, she developed anxiety. When he started working out, she felt abandoned. When he read, she was lonely. When he thought, she felt neglected. She fed on his guilt like a sommelier savoring wine. 20 years later, he was a husk, successful by every external measure, empty as a cicada shell. The feast has its own liturgy. First comes the appetizer of small complaints. You never You always. Tiny cuts that barely bleed. Then the main course, the manufactured crisis. Just as you're about to break through, just as momentum builds, suddenly they need you, desperately, urgently. Their need becomes your emergency, and your dreams go back on ice. But here's the exquisite horror. Emotional vampires often love you, genuinely. That's what makes them so effective. A parasite that hates its host is easily detected and removed. But one that loves you, that needs you, that can't live without you, that's a parasite that convinces you that feeding it is love. The Japanese have a concept, Kyuketsuki no AI, vampire love. It's the affection that sustains itself by diminishing its object. Like a plant that loves sunlight so much it grows over other plants, blocking their light. The vampire doesn't mean to drain you. They just love you so much they need all of you. Every drop, every dream, every tomorrow you might have had. Here's a thought experiment that'll ruin your sleep. Track your energy for 1 week. Not physical energy, spiritual energy, creative energy, hope energy. Notice when it peaks and when it mysteriously vanishes. Notice whose presence coincides with the drain. Notice how certain conversations leave you emptied, even when nothing obviously negative was said. A 2025 Harvard study on relationship dynamics found that energy asymmetry was the single best predictor of relationship failure. Better than financial problems, better than infidelity. When one person consistently drains while the other is drained, the relationship becomes a slow motion, murder-suicide of potential. The most successful emotional vampires don't look like vampires. They look like victims. They've weaponized vulnerability, turned need into a superpower. Their anxiety becomes your cage. Their depression becomes your chains. Their inability to self-soothe becomes your life sentence. You can't leave. That would be cruel. You can't pursue your dreams. That would be selfish. You can't even complain. That would be victim blaming. But here's the secret they don't want you to know. Vampires can only enter if you invite them in. Every boundary you don't set is an invitation. Every dream you defer to meet their needs is permission to feed. Every time you choose their comfort over your calling, you're baring your neck. The poet Rainer Maria Rilke wrote, "Perhaps all the dragons in our lives are princesses who are only waiting to see us act, just once, with beauty and courage. But what if the princess is the dragon? What if the very person you're trying to save is the one devouring you? So I ask you, and let this question burn like garlic in your throat, whose needs have you been meeting at the cost of your own becoming? Who feeds on your tomorrows? And here's the real question, the one that separates the living from the living dead. Are you brave enough to stop being food? Some men discover that starving a vampire doesn't kill it. It just reveals what it always was. When you stop feeding their needs, when you start choosing your path over their comfort, watch carefully. A person who loves you will adjust, will find their own blood supply. A vampire will rage, will guilt, will threaten to die without you. Let them. Your dreams have been patient long enough. Your tomorrow has been postponed long enough. The feast ends when you decide you're no longer on the menu. And if they can't love you without feeding on you, then what they called love was just hunger wearing a mask. In the ruins of who you were supposed to be, you find who you are. There's a monastery in Tibet, or perhaps it's in your own chest, where monks practice a meditation called sky burial. They visualize their own death, watch vultures pick their bones clean, see their skeleton bleached by sun and time. But that's not the meditation. The meditation is what happens next. In that perfect emptiness, something impossible occurs. They discover they still exist. Not the flesh, not the story, not the man others needed them to be. Something else. Something that cannot die because it was never born. This is the final paradox. The last truth that tastes like broken glass and honey. Sometimes a man must lose everything he thought he was to find the only thing he ever needed to be. I met him in a coffee shop in Seattle. Or was it Portland? These cities of rain all blur together. He was 47, drinking black coffee like it was chemotherapy, wearing a suit that no longer fit because he'd lost weight. Not from diet, from shedding. She left, he said. And in those 2 words was a novel's worth of pain. 23 years of marriage, ended. The house, gone. The kids, weekend visitors. The future he'd mapped out like a general planning a campaign. Evaporated. But here's what happened next. What happens to some men when the scaffolding collapses? He started to breathe. For the first time in decades, he took a breath that wasn't measured against someone else's expectations. He discovered something terrifying and beautiful. He had no idea who he was. The liberation wasn't in being alone. It was in finally having permission to meet himself. Nietzsche wrote about the Übermensch, the overman, the one who creates his own values. But he missed a step. Before you can overcome, you must undercome. You must sink beneath everything you thought you were, drown in the shipwreck of your constructed self, and see what, if anything, swims back to the surface. A 2025 study on post-divorce identity reconstruction found something the researchers didn't expect. Men who reported the highest life satisfaction weren't those who quickly found new relationships. They were the ones who spent at least a year in what they called intentional identity confusion, deliberately not knowing who they were, sitting in the discomfort of undefined existence. There's an ancient Sufi story about a man who spent his whole life polishing a brick, trying to make it a mirror. When he finally realized the futility, he threw the brick away and wept. In his tears, he saw his reflection for the first time. The brick was never meant to show him himself. It was meant to keep him busy, distracted from the terrifying work of self-encounter. This is what happens when men stop chasing what destroys them. They're left with silence. Not peaceful silence, the other kind. The silence that screams with possibility. The silence where you can hear your own thoughts and realize you haven't had an original one in years. The silence where you understand that you've been living someone else's life, wearing someone else's face, dreaming someone else's dreams. But in that apocalypse of the self, and apocalypse, remember, means unveiling, something emerges. Call it the abandoned self, the one you left in childhood cemetery, the one who wanted to be a pirate or an astronaut or a wizard, not literally, but essentially. The one who knew that life was meant to be an adventure, not an endurance test. The Japanese have a practice called forest bathing, spending time alone among trees. But the real practice isn't about trees. It's about remembering that you're a biological creature, not a social construct. That your lungs know how to breathe without permission. That your heart beats without consensus. That there's something in you older than your name, deeper than your roles, truer than your reputation. Here's what they don't tell you about rock bottom. It's solid. You can build on it. Everything else, success, love, identity, is sand. Pretty sand, comfortable sand, but sand nonetheless. When a man hits rock bottom, when everything he built collapses, he discovers the only foundation that matters, the bedrock of his own existence. A client once told me, whispered it like a confession. The day she left, I cried for 6 hours. Then I did something I hadn't done in 20 years. I asked myself what I wanted for dinner. Not what we wanted, what I wanted. I couldn't answer. I'd forgotten how to want. He spent the next 3 months relearning desire, starting with food, moving to music, eventually to life itself. He became a beginner at being himself. This is the liberation of the abandoned self. You stop performing. You stop achieving. You stop becoming. You just are. And in that being, messy, undefined, without utility or purpose, you find something that no relationship could give you, no achievement could prove, no validation could confirm. You find the irreducible fact of your existence. Kierkegaard called it the leap into faith. But faith in what? Not God necessarily. Faith in the value of being undefined. Faith that you're worth knowing, even if, especially if, what you find isn't marketable, isn't lovable, isn't useful. Faith that the abandoned self, the one you buried under decades of adaptation, might have something to say. So here's my final question, posed not as a whisper, but as a shout into the void of your constructed life. What would happen if you stopped? Stopped chasing, stopped proving, stopped performing, stopped explaining. What would emerge from that silence? Who would you be if you didn't have to be anyone? Some men discover that the abandoned self isn't pretty. It's wild, untamed, inappropriate. It wants things that don't fit in suburban lives. It laughs at the wrong moments. It cries without reason. It stares at stars and forgets appointments. It's useless by every metric that matters. And that's precisely why it's the only thing worth saving. The ultimate liberation isn't finding yourself. That implies you're lost. It's abandoning the search. It's sitting in the ruins of who you were supposed to be and realizing that ruins are just another kind of architecture. It's understanding that every ending is an invitation to stop beginning and start being. In the end, when all the mirrors are broken and all the vampires are starved and all the phantom limbs have stopped aching, you're left with the simplest and most terrifying truth. You exist. Without reason, without purpose, without justification, you simply are. And that raw fact of being, that abandoned, irreducible self, is the only lover that will never leave, the only truth that cannot lie, the only dream that doesn't need to be chased because it's already here, waiting in the silence, patient as death and twice as certain.